Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we're Masechtas Nazir daf Nun Dalid. Although we did review this already in yesterday's daf, we're going to go over it one more time on Nun Gimel Amud Beis, 5 lines from the bottom. Desanya. The pasuk says, "V'chol asher yigal pnei hasada b'chol cherev o b'meis." So this pasuk is referring to Tumas Oihil. And we've made the following drasha. It says, Al Penei Hasada, that if the mace is found on the field, Zeh Hamahil Al Penei Mace. This is referring to a person leans over the mace. That's how they become Tamei Oihil. Or when the pasuk says, Becholol, Zeh Ever Menachai. Even if, let's say you have a limb that was cut off a living person, and V'yeshlo halosarucha, that has enough flesh on it to regenerate itself, so then that also is significant enough to be matamim oil. Cherev harizek achol, which we've seen in many places, including Masechtas Psachim. That when it comes to a sword, it has the same din as the chol itself, as the corpse itself, which means it will take upon itself the level of Avi Avos Hatoma. O b'meis, ze'ever hanechol min a mace. This is referring to a limb which was removed from a mace. O be'etzem adam ze'roivat samais. This is referring to a quarter kav of bones. O be'kaver ze'kever sosum. This is referring to a sealed grave. And this we saw the mafarish, she'ein bo chol tefach. Bein hameis v'hagoyel shematama. There's not a chol tefach. Normally, at chol tefach, a tefach of airspace will be chaytzeitz between the body and the person. But if there's not a chol tefach, then the tuma is mile al rakia, and therefore you become tamei oil. As we continue to nun dal manal, Diamar tuma bekat v'olo bekat v'yoredes. That's how tuma works in this situation. It's keilu, like you're in contact with the mace itself, and therefore it continues to go through, even though you didn't actually touch it, but because of oil hatoma, so you also become tameh. Be'ilu gabenigia, when regarding the notion of touching a mace, Omer Bihuda, Tanya, we learn like this. The pasuk says, "V'chol hanayga be'etzemo b'cholol." So this pasuk is talking about B'chol Asher Yigal Pnei Asad, was talking about oil hatoma, that you're not touching it, but you go over it. Here it's talking about you actually are physically touching the mace. So in that situation, the pasuk, let's see the whole pasuk. This is Lakach Ezaiv, that you take the hiss of a tavel b'mayim and it's dipped into water by an ish tahar. The hiza al ha'oihel, the alkol hakelim al nafashos, and anyone who becomes tamei, it's sprinkled with this concoction. Asher hayusham, the al hanogeh be'etzem is someone who touched a bone, a b'chol, b'meso, b'cover. That's the pasuk in B'midbar Yutes. So we make the following drasha. It says be'etzem ze'etzem kasa'ira. That's even if a person would come in contact with a bone and touch a bone, which is the size of a barley seed. So the din is, as we mentioned before in yesterday's daf, and many times to our shas, that the only time we're going to have a level of oil hatoma is dafka in a situation where it is roiv minyan, roiv binyan, galgoilus, and shedra, maybe together or separate. But in this situation, if you only have one single bone, it's totally on if it's the size of a barley seed. If it's pachis mikasa'ira, it's not even going to be matam b'mag b'masa. However, if it's the size of a barley seed, it is matam b'mag b'masa, but not b'oil. If you have, again, a limb that was amputated or taken off, so ve'ein boil halos arucha, but it is not able to regenerate itself, so in that situation, then it's not going to be matama on a tumas oil level, but only b'mag b'masa. If it is the yeshbol halos arucha, then it's also matama b'oil. O b'meis, ze'ever hanechol in a mace, is referring to a limb, which again was removed from a body. Obi kaver, Omer Shlakish, Zekever Shlifni Hadibor. This is the kever before the Torah was given. What does that mean? Says the Mafarish Climber. that even Ovid Kachavim were Tameh with touch. Avol B'She'ein Metamen B'Oihel. Even though we don't find Tumas Oihel by an Ovid Kachavim, but it does apply regarding Maga touching. Kedisanya, as the Mafar says, Kibri Ha'Ovid Kachavim Ein Metamen B'Oihel. Now, when it comes to a grave of a non-Jew, it doesn't take upon itself Tumas Oihel. El B'Negia. However, there is still an Isser Negia of touching. Anything, any of these graves that were before the Torah was given, that's called the kever ben noyach. The kever of kachavim leachar dibur kekoidim hadibur she'ein metamen ba'oihel if he shall nitnel hem Torah mishum hachi karli kever shlifnei hadibur. So a kever lifnei hadibur is referring to an of kachavim. They never have the ability to metamen ba'oihel, only b'maga. Okay. So says the Gemara, so hi Abram and a mace, hey chinami. It mentions this case over here of Abram and a mace. They have a limb from a dead body that's matama. So what is that case? If this limb is large enough that it has a bone which is the size of the barley seed, so how's that any different than touching a bone? We said just as long as you're touching a bone which is the size of a sa'ira, that's what we went out from be'etzem. So then, how do we understand b'meis that Abraham Nachum and a mace? El delays be'etzem kasara. That even if an entire limb, but it's not etzem kasara, it's not big enough like a barley seed, you feel hachi rachman arabia. The Torah still includes it. So we see actually over here an interesting point that the din is that if we're dealing with a small little part of a bone, so that's etzem kasara. However, we see, and this was actually a dispute that we saw all the way on the previous Nun Gimel Mebez, if you have a situation, al Avram and a mace, the Ein Alehin Basa Karoi, doesn't have enough meat to flesh to regenerate. So Rav Yochanan says, Ein Hanazir Megalech Alehin. Reish Lakish Emer Hanazir Megalech Alehin. So this sounds like Reish Lakish, because it says over here, we have a reboy. It must be the pasuk is talking about where it's not the size of a kisaira, because if it was etzem kisaira, there would be matamba boil anyway, it would be matamba b'maga anyway, because it's the size of a barley seed. So it must be talking about a case, it's not etzem kisaira, nonetheless, the limb from a dead body still is going to be included. So again, it's a kasha. So that was a proof to Rabbi Yochanan, or to Reish Lakish. So Rabbi Yochanan said, no, olam de ispe. Really, it has etzem kasara. So if that's the case, so why do we need this reboy? You already know it from etzem. So the pasuk of etzem, that it has to be the bone the size of a barley seed, that's only coming to tell if you touch it. However, b'masa, if you would be engaged in carrying it even without touching it, so maybe the din isn't the same. So that's why it tells you that no, we need a separate reboy, even though normally we link mag and masa together. Why? Maybe this is the point, that we have these two different ribuyim in the pasuk, one to include mag and one to include masa, but it's dafka if it's etzem kasara. If it's pachas mikain, if it's less than that, as Rabbi Yochanan said, perhaps that the Nazir will not be megaleach. Okay, fine. And then the Mishnah said, so if a Nazir comes in contact with these different situations where he's megaleach, he also has to be sprinkled upon by the paraduma on days 3 and 7, and it's saiser all his days. Now, boilhu haditani ad shiyitar b'shvi koi adi ovid ha'erev shemesh. Some people remove the words adi ovid erev shemesh. Umani Rebbe Lezerhi. So, who is this? It must be like Rebbe Lezer. Says the Mefarsh, the Aimer beperk mi she'aimer harini naz megaleach maskil umayne miyad. He says that you can start counting immediately. Mishum v'kidish es roishai b'yom hahu. I'll be shalom heavy karbonosov. According to the Shita Rebbe Lezer, you're allowed to start counting right away. As soon as you begin the process, even though you didn't bring into the karbanos yet. And therefore, this is the question: Hadetani ad shiyitar B'shvikoi, does it mean on the seventh day? And that's like Rabbi Lezer, because on the 8th day is when you bring the karbanos. So maybe on the 7th day already you can start counting your days of Nazirus, of Tahara. Odilma b'shminikoi umai ad shiyitar ad shiyavi karbanaisav. Umani Rabbanan the Rabbanan hold, unlike Rabbi Lezer, that you cannot start counting until you've actually brought all the karbanos on the 8th day. So the question is, when do we start counting for the Yemei Tahara as a Nazir? Do we say it starts on day 7, even though the karbanos were not brought, like Rabbi Lezer, or is it like the Shita of the Rabbanan? You have to wait till 8th day to start counting. Tashma. We had a tiny seifa. It says in the latter part, which is not here, but if you look in the Mafarsh, Avol hasoichais, which we're going to end up seeing soon, refers to a person who is by a tree. There's a tree over the ground, and the branches are protruding over a mace, and those branches are not thick, they're not wide at tafach. So in that situation, a Nazir who comes close there will not need to be megaleach. So it says over there, Maschil umayna miyad. It says over there that he could begin counting immediately. So that's mashma on the 7th day. So ha reishomai ad shiyitar ad sheyever karbanaisav when a rabbanan he diarmin nazirus the tahara ad shmini loichayala. So actually, the fact that it says it in a different language in a seif, which we're going to see soon in a second, in this next Mishnah, and in that situation, you can start counting right away, which is Masha already on the 7th day. It must be our Mishnah is talking about you can't start counting the 7th day. You have to wait till the 8th day, which is like the sheet of the Rabbanan. Look in the Mafarsh. Of a Masaychachais Maskil Miyad. Miyoim Shvi on the 7th day. Of Yishenu maybe carbon Machlal. Because you're not bringing a carbon in the cases we're going to see in the Mishnah soon. The Reish is be carbon. However, the Reish where there's carbonas, you have to wait. You have to wait. Okay. Let's see the next Mishnah. Masnisa. Avol hasoichachais. When it comes to soichachais, we'll see the last line of the Mishnah. Ein hanazir megalech. So a nazir is not going to need to be megalech in any of these situations. So soichas already explained. Let's look at the mafarish. Tahainu ilan hamesach al aretz. You have a tree that's over the ground. The yesh toma tachas knife, and there's toma underneath the branch. However, the branch itself is not a tefach wide in order to be able to produce an oil, and therefore that's the reason why midaraisa it's not tumas oil. About prois, what is that? Says the Mefarish, v'chein tachas avanim haprois hayotzes chutz mineged. If you have stones that are protruding outside of a wall, the toma tachas achas mehem, and the toma is underneath one of these bricks. And again, in this situation, it's not a tefach wide, and therefore midaraisa it's not really a tumas oil, and therefore because of that he's not going to be megalech. The base of pras. So what's the base of pras? Which you see in so many places in Shas. The Mafar says it's a sada shenebed ba kever v'nechrash. You have a field in which there was a kever somewhere in it. There was a dead body. However, we forgot exactly where, and eventually they plowed through this field. So when it comes to a base of pras, because of that, it says Taisus, Sadish Nechrosh Boy Kever, the Adkuf Ama Chashu Chachamim, it's a Durabanan, they're concerned, Shema Dal Macharisha Hatsamais, Vinishayr Sham Etzim Kasaira, Valeka Tuma El Midrabanan. So again, all these cases are Tum Rabbanan, because Midyar Raisa, we're going to assume that this body, either the plow is not big enough or will not go deep enough to be able to even hit the bones, or even if it does, it's going to end up causing that the bones will be shattered, that it won't even be, it will not end up being like enough to make oil hatoma. It's shaykh that maybe there will be a little bone the size of a barley seed, which is the chashash midrabanan, even though again it's not for sure because it's already been plowed. All right. So again, but if you go through a base of pras, so we're not going to require you to be megalech, because the whole notion of a nazir not going through a base of pras is only din d'Rabbanan. The eretz ha'amim. So which we're going to just touch upon in today's daf, we're going to spend more time talking about it, going through other nations, going through the land outside of Eretz Yisrael. So the Chachamim made a gezerah, we'll see why and to what extent, on that particular land. But it's not deraisa. V'hagoyel v'hadoifek. What's a goyel v'hadoifek? So, well, first of all, let's see the mafarish of Eretz Ha'amim. Shenizhar ba'aretz v'toich yimei nezirusav yotza v'nichnas ha'aretz ha'amim ein naz megaleach. So, as a nazir goes through this land, you're not going to be megaleach. So, what is the case of a goyel v'hadoifek? So, Taisa says like this: Perish Rashi. Beperikam Niksuvas Goylel Zekisui Ha'aron. This is referring to the cover of the Aron. This is also question 9. Question 9 cleanly asks the David Mahu Goyel Perish Rashi Lataisus. So Taisus quotes Rashi and says that Goylel is referring to the cover of the Aron, of the casket. And Daifik Hu Daifin Shalt Stadim is referring to the sides of the casket. It says Taisus, no. Taisus says, or Benotam, Perish Benham the Goylel Hu hamatseva. That's referring to the tombstone itself, the matseva. The doifik avanim shahamatseva nishenes bahen. The stones that support the tombstone. So it's not the mace itself in these situations, but it's either the casket or the tombstone. And so a person comes in contact with those things. Midiraisa, it's not going to be matama. Revius dam. When it comes to coming in contact with a revius of blood, v'oihel v'roivat samais, or oil regarding a quarter amount of bones, v'kelim hanoigim a mace, or a vessel that touched a mace, uv'yemei sifayroi uv'yemei gomroi, Nazir who becomes a Mitzayra, al elu ein hanazir megaleach. In all these different cases, a Nazir is not megaleach, umaz b'shlish v'shvi, to be sprinkled on the 3rd and 7th day. Let's look at Taisus. V'mei sifra v'mei gamro. Perish Nazir shemana mixas nazirus. So Nazir was he was counting part of his nazirus, v'nitztra, and he got saras, ben yimei gamroi, Dahainu yimei chalutai sheachlitu l'toma, that he was already established his tamei. Vein yimei sifra, when he's counting, ach shehuchot, after he's already established as a mitzayra. Raha kohen v'hine nirpa hanegam and hatzarua. The kohen purified him from his saras. Umevi tzipoyedin, he has to bring his birds. Megalech, and for mitzayra he also shaves. V'nichnas b'machne Yisrael yashim mechutz olu shevashomim she'as v'tashmish v'yoyim tashvi megalech. On the 7th day he shaves. And Shmini maybe karbanos of tzarasa, and he has to bring his karbanos for his being a mitzayra. The oisan yamim kurin yimei sifroi. Those days are considered to be yimei sifroi. Okay, so umazeh B'shlishi b'shvi, says Taisus, B'gemara mashma deloikoi akelim hanoigim ames. We're going to see the Gemara is not mashma, it's talking about the kelim that touched the mace. Demari b'kli eitz. Ve'in adam hanoigeh behem sar chazah. If it's kli eitz, you don't need sprinkling. L'chein l'koi aimei gamra v'mei sifra de'in toin hazah. Also, the Matzara doesn't require this. Elokoi ashaira. It's going on the other cases, a revius dam, a goel v'daifek, that there is a requirement actually of shlish v'shvi, that even though he's not megalech, we do want him to be sprinkled upon if he comes in contact with a revius of blood, or a goel v'daifek, which we saw the two pshatim in Rashi in either Rashi or Taisos, what exactly that means. As we continue to Nundal Mabez and continue in this Mishnah. As we said, even though these are levels of Tumah, it's not going to be Saiser, that which came before, says the Mafarish. Misha Nazir Nazirus Maruba. Let's say he was Nazir for a long time. The Hishel Naziruso, he finishes Nazirus. Then he goes to Eretz Yisrael. So Beis Hillel Oimrim Nazir Bat Kavatchila. It's like he has to start his Nazirus again. The Saiser Sakoidman. Bahasam Havi Time Lefi Shanasa Naziruso B'chutzarts. That's because he did his Nazirus in Chutz La'aretz, ve'ein ikr Nazirus el Be'eretz Yisrael. Now the main element of Nazirus is in Israel. Here he started in Eretz Yisrael, and then he left. So the only time there was this discussion that possibly it's Seiser everything is Dafka if you were in Chutz La'aretz and then you went to Eretz Yisrael. However, if you were in Eretz Yisrael then you left, so then it won't be. You can begin counting immediately, which we said is on the seventh day. There's no carbonice because this is not a din deraisa. The emes amru, the truth is, the truth is, all these different forms of tumah, they are oilus. Says the Mefarish. Halacha hilu Moshe Sinai. Yimei hazav hazava yimei hiskira shel matzayra. All these different people are tame, whether it's a zav or a zama or a matzayra during the time that they're locked up. Yomim harishonim shekos behind the first days that are in the hiskira hakoyin shivash yomim that are locked up for 7 days. Uksiv hiskira hakoyin shivash yomim shenis the second time. Oil and low they count. So all those times that you're a zav and zava, as well as mitzayra, you may hiskirai. So the din is that it will count for your times as a nazir. Okay. Says the Gemara, ve'elu hein hasaychachais. Ilan hamesach al aretz, which we already established, is referring to a tree in which its branches protrude over the ground. So in that situation, we're not concerned midiraisa because the branches are not tefach wide, and uprois hayotzes minageder. That's referring to these stones that protrude over the wall. And again, there's a mace there, but it's not midiraisa because it's not wide a tefach. The eretz amim. So a person who goes to eretz amim, so then there's a din tuma, not midiraisa, was a din tuma that he's sprinkled upon and all these things. So, but there's no carbonice, so it's not seiser. So iboilhu eretz amim. The whole din of a person who walks outside of Eretz Yisrael to Chutz La'aretz, Mishum Avir Gazer Leha, is it that they're geyser on the air, says the Mefarish, Nami Gazer Leha, even on the air. Vehecha de'ika Avira B'lo Gusha, K'gan Nechnas La B'kadoin Amasfina, Shul Apostle Aretz El Nechnas Ba Ba'avira Kolish Le Tuma. The tumah may be weak, but the din is that since there's tumas avir, even if you don't actually touch the ground, if you're in a box of sorts, you'll still be tameh. Odilma mishum gusha gazul, because of the clods of earth, says the Mefarish. The tumah chamurahu, it's such a very strong tumah. The gazul have a little mishum avir. It's not because of air. The hainu tumah kala. The in nechnas ba baragla. If you walk in with your feet, command the naga b'kaverdam. It's like you touched an actual kever of a bakarin low, but not if you are put into a wagon. So it's actually interesting. According to this, he's saying because the tumah is a tumah chamura, you're only going to be tameh for gusha if you actually walk into the land. Let's look at Taisus. V'kasha harav Rav Yankiv mi or links did not be perikamdo ohalos ve'el matam b'magamasav oil. These are the cases where there's no tumas oil, and one of them says the eretz amim. Now b'hachamash with the pshita one, it's simple. The matama b'oil. It sounds like you are tummy b'oil. Ki mahil mia agusha. If a person is oil over the clods of earth of eretz amim, below hefsek with nothing in of shidativ amigdal. If there's no shidativ amigdal, so you are going to become tameh if there's nothing separating you. But l'chayra that doesn't make sense. There's no din of oil tuma by Eretz Amim. We don't say it's like it's the same thing to coming in contact with a mace. But over here it is mashma that way. But Teretz the Hasamayri begusha haba Eretz Amim Eretz Ha'amim Eretz Yisrael. That's referring to a person who goes from to outside to Israel. Rabbeinu Tam Omer Dihi Nishnas Kodim Gezer Achreina. This was learned before a later gezerah. Dimikaru gazer al avira v'lo klum. Originally they were in gezer on the air. The oidei shomer the enamatama achen nichna sham reisha v'rubai. You're only telling me if you bring the majority of your body out. Kedamashma b'shalei sugin v'lo kashenachnas yadol avad. Not if you just stick your hand out. Dilu b'oil hameis matama filu b'machnas yadai. So it gives us distinction that oil atomas, even if you just stick your hand out, that's enough. However, by Eretz Oamim, by sticking your hand out, that's not going to be enough. It has to be that it's Rosh Haverubo. Let's look at question 10. Tanan bo'ol halois ve'el matam and magol masavovo bo'oil, and it says Eretz Oamim. So kasha sugin masha b'shita the matam bo'oil ki mahil agusha bo'oil. So he says 3 answers. Hasa ma'ari begusha habam Eretz Oamim. That's referring to the Eretz, the gusha, the clods of earth that came from other nations. Hahi nishnas kodim gezerah chreina al avira. This was learned before the other gezerah on air. Or hasam kamashmon shi machnas yado. If you just stick your hand out in a matama kamoba oil mace, the hacha boroish of arubo. Here we're talking about the head and the majority of your body. Okay, ayin taisus. So again, what exactly is the status of Eretz Oamim? Does it have the status of Tumas Avir, the air, or is it Gusha, the clouds of earth? Tashma. So he said, if you go outside into Eretz Oamim, that there is a din that you will be sprinkled on the 3rd and 7th day. If it's just because of the air, Hazol Lamuli. Why would you need to be sprinkled on if we're dealing with Avir? Says the Mafarish, Heichadiika Avira, Blue Gusha. If only it is you came in contact with the air, mi havula tuma chamur kuli hai to the boy hazah shlishi. It's hard to imagine that you would require tuma shlishi, that you hazah of shlishi v'shvi when the person didn't even touch the ground. All he did was come in contact with the air. El mishum gusha. The fact that we're strict and say that you do require hazah and shlishi v'shvi, it must be because you physically came in contact with the earth. So maybe it's because of gusha. Lo. So the question is, if it's because of a virus, then how's it shaykh to say they're going to have to be mazah shlish shvi? The chikatania shara. When it says you have to do the sprinkling, you're right. It's talking about a sachos, a price. It's not talking about Eretz Oamim, because you're right. When it comes to Eretz Oamim, we're not going to require you to do hazah shlish shvi, because maybe we're just talking about tumas avir. How can I mistabim in that tani? It says also the kalim hanoigim a mace, kalim that touch a mace. So hani kalim b'nei hazayinun. So these kalim are these things that are to be sprinkled on, says the Mafarish. If let's say a Nazir touches these kalim, that touch the mace, why would you need hazah on that? It doesn't make any sense. So therefore we see, says the Mafarish, there are certain things that do require hazah, some don't. However, when it comes to Eretz Oamim, it's shaykh to in fact say that it does not require hazah, and the reason why is because we're dealing with a situation that maybe it's just because of Tumas Avir, and for Tumas Avir we're not going to require. Adkan.